Good morning, my name's Eric Lambert. This is our second video on the temple, the true location of the temple. The first video showed why we don't think it's on the traditional Temple Mount, why it's south of that. We showed biblical reasons, we showed archaeology, we showed experts that talk about things around that. We showed our new discoveries from Bliss and Dickey's maps from 120 years ago, which helped set the parameters for Nehemiah's walls, which also helped us locate where the temple was. Our research started with Dr. Ernest Martin, as I said before, and he's the one that set us on this path, and this is how far we've gone since then. We'll start on this page with the Watergate. We have the Watergate here, and it's right about there. And this is the progression of Nehemiah as he goes around the walls and comes up to the Watergate, and then he comes next to the great projecting tower, which is right here. And we can draw a little square. It won't be perfect, but we think the temple is right about here. And Nehemiah calls that the great projecting tower. So the Watergate, then the great projecting tower, then he comes to the Ophel wall, which is up here. This is where Solomon built his palace. This is where we found other things, Hezekiah's seal, to show Hezekiah lived there, things found here. Everyone agrees this is where the palace was. And then the traditional Temple Mount, as you know, is this area here, and the Dome of the Rock in the center, Al-Aqsa Mosque right here. Okay, so we also know from Jeremiah that as we come around this way with Nehemiah, that there is a horse gate, and the horse gate is on a corner. So we know that the wall turns here and goes this way towards what we discovered was the sheep pool, and the sheep pool and the sheep gate would be nearby. So this would set the parameters once again south of the Temple Mount. We know the horse gate is on a corner, and some people put it up here on this wall, but there's no corner there. So we think we're doing some pretty good work here and finding the exact location. But this is the order of events from Nehemiah, and it does not include the traditional Temple Mount. And let's see, we need to stay here for just a minute. Let's stay here just for a second. Two Israeli archaeologists decided that in Nehemiah, it says that Nehemiah restored Jerusalem down to the broad wall. And they say, no, that's not correct. It should be, he abandoned Jerusalem down to the broad wall. So there's been a big controversy about the city of David. One of the things was there an upper city? Was there a lower city? And we say yes. I think that's very obvious as you look at different archaeologists. If you look at Josephus himself, he says there's a lower city and an upper city. And that becomes critical in understanding what's going on in the time of Nehemiah and in the time of Josephus, that there is that kind of situation going on. So he abandons this part, Nehemiah abandons all of this down to the broad wall. And we'll come back to the two parts of the city later. We believe that Benjamin and Judah both owned the city. It says in the Old Testament that Judah lived cheek to jowl with the Jebusites and could not drive them out. And one of the reasons is this wall is incredibly high and it's difficult to attack. So this is easier, it's still hard, but it's easier than up here. And so Judah and Benjamin both. One time it says Judah couldn't drive out the Jebusites. The other time it says Benjamin couldn't drive them out. So we already know from 4 different books in the Bible, Benjamin and Judah owned the city of David, the old city once upon a time. All right, so these two archaeologists and the NIV in the footnote says that Jerusalem was abandoned as far as the broad wall. So the footnote agrees with those two archaeologists that all of this was left out, and in my view, and this is what we talked about in the first video. So all of this is abandoned all the way down to the broad wall. We said in the last video that the broad wall was really the wall of the courtyard, not a wide wall. There was a wide wall found up here on the maps of Jerusalem by Avigad Nachman Abigad, and he said it was up there. It is a broad wall, but the Palestine Exploration Fund said that the translation probably fit the wall of the courtyard, because even in the 19th century they found a broad wall. So Abigad was not the first one to find a broad wall, but the Palestine Exploration Fund speculated that it was really the wall of the courtyard. So what we wanted to point out is Nehemiah says next to the Gate of Ephraim was a courtyard where they celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles. And if you go to Jerusalem, and I hope you do, this area up here is a very flat area, there, at least down here especially, and some up here. And so that would be the courtyard next to the Gate of Ephraim. We established last time this is a funny angle in the wall, and in 2nd Chronicles it calls this the angle in the wall, and a tower built by Uzziah right there. We met the rabbi, my daughter and I met the rabbi that lives here. He agrees with this. He wants to dig here. They found an archaeologist. They have a director to help dig, and they're working on that. We hope to help them. Then we discovered, Chronicles says that there was 400 feet of wall, or 400 cubits rather, of wall that was torn down. That's 600 feet, and it matches Bliss and Dickey's measurements of this wall. The northern kingdom of Israel tore down 600 feet, 400 cubits of wall. And so this matches. We have the funny angle. It used to be called the Gate of Ephraim. Nehemiah restores that name later in a very interesting way. But it was the Gate of Ephraim once upon a time. Since Ephraim tore down this wall, we're no longer going to call it the Gate of Ephraim. Ephraim's another name for Israel, so we don't want to do that. But we have this, the angle, interesting angle. We have the Tower of Uzziah. We have the 600 feet. We have the corner gate and tower. Here's a scarp that runs this way, and it makes a nice corner. And so we have a gate down here and a tower that Uzziah built. Then we have a tower here, and the valley gate is right here. It comes out, it faces a valley. We have 1,500 cubits, or 1,000 cubits, 1,500 feet down this way towards the dung gate. So we have about 10 different reference points that tell us we're in the right area. We have the courtyard, the angle, the tower, the wall, the tower, the gate, the tower, the gate, this one. And we also have in Schindler's list, Schindler's graveyard, we have the Tower of the Ovens. So I think we're on the right track. We want to dig here, we want to dig here. Archaeologists don't like this. They say, well, we didn't find any pottery, we didn't find any coins, so this can't possibly be the right place. But I wrote to one of those archaeologists, and he actually said that to me, and I said, well, did you dig here? And of course he said no. And so that's what we want to do. We're looking for pottery and coins. That's all archaeologists care about anyway. So we want to prove that Nehemiah was there. The whole school that I teach at is praying for Nehemiah to unleash his pockets all over the place, coins, seals, whatever, and that we can dig them up there. Okay, so we have the two archaeologists, and we have the wall of the courtyard, and now we have something else that was discovered in Jerusalem by a separate mission of the Palestine Exploration Fund, Crowfoot and Fitzgerald. They actually named the gate they find after Crowfoot, and sometimes it's called the Western Gate, and it's right here. This road comes down like this, and then there's a little road that comes here, and that's exactly right there where the gate is. What's interesting about the gate, however, is that it's not on the plateau of the city of David. It's actually down the hill in this valley down here. So it's on the west side of this city of David, and it's down the hill. They had to dig down. Why they dug there, don't know, but they found it, and they found that's where a gate was. Now the gate used to be on the outside of the city of David, because the circle around the city goes like this, and the wall was, the gate on the wall faced this valley, and it was a protection for the city of David. Then this one had a separate wall around it, but this wall down here was made to protect the valley. The valley's filled in later, but Solomon, I believe, made this wall. There's several scriptures that say he made up for what David didn't do. And I said, well, how can that be? David was a warrior. Solomon's not a warrior. He has all those wives. He's not interested in war. He doesn't make war. But rather, David didn't have to build the wall, because there's already a wall around this one and a wall around this one. So this is what David neglected to do, at least in my opinion. So there is a wall here. My daughter and I found one down in Schindler's cemetery down here near the bottom of the wall down here. There's one that caved in, part of the dirt caved in. And there's a wall there. And it may be one of the walls that Bliss and Dickey dug at, and so they made their little punctuations down the wall there to figure out what was going on. So maybe we found the same thing they found. Don't know, but I think that's what Solomon did. That means this gate no longer is an outside gate. And that's what Crowfoot and Fitzgerald found. It's no longer an outside gate, but it was maintained. So this is very interesting. The Bible talks about a gate around the temple, and he calls it in 2 Kings 11, he calls it the Sur gate. And then in the Greek version of that same passage, it calls it the gate of the highway. And then in Chronicles, 2 Chronicles 23, it calls that same gate the foundation gate. And then in the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, it calls it the middle gate. Now, all of those things, I think, work in our favor. There was a bridge that crossed between the upper city, or the lower city and the upper city, but up here it really doesn't make a lot of sense. If you go and visit the city, you'll see that this is higher than the surrounding, but really there's a plaza here, and then this starts to rise a little bit, but there's no need for a gate here. No need for a bridge here, or a gate in the back. But down here, this used to be a very steep ravine. And so I believe that the bridge we're looking for, that everyone's looking for, goes across the valley like this, and that's where Titus the Roman stood when he negotiated with the rebels on the upper city for their surrender. Fitzgerald and Crowfoot went across the valley like this. They dug a deep trench right out from the gate, and they found nothing. All they found was rubble. They just found fill. And that fits because that's exactly what happened. Pompeii and I think the Hasmoneans filled in this valley quite well so that you could walk from this side to this side a lot easier. So the first time I went to Jerusalem, 2015, I looked out and I was looking for the Tyropian Valley, and I said, there's no valley here. And then it slowly dawned on me that they had already filled that in, and there was no need for a valley, or there wasn't a valley there anymore. So when they cut across here, all they found was the fill that was thrown in there to fill up the valley. So in their gate, I think it is a bridge that goes across to this point right here. And then it goes further up to perhaps this point right here. So the bridge we're looking for comes from this gate. Now, one of the reasons I say that is because the gate had no road leading to it. Fitzgerald and Crowfoot said that it was too rough for a road there. There were no pavers there, and they found no road. But you have to have a road if it's a gate. So, again, we find over here it's called the Gate of the Highway, and I think this is the Sur Gate. So then you have the highway not as an Autobahn like in Germany, not a 4-lane road like in the United States, or an 8-lane or whatever we have now, but rather a highway like a bridge. It doesn't mean highway like a big road. It means a highway like a high place and a high road going across. Now I say I went to this point here because Josephus mentions a rock rising out of the valley between the upper city and the lower city. And then he said there was a twin rock, but it rose much higher, and I think that was located right here. So the bridge goes across here and perhaps up this way, across to the upper side, and Titus is standing on this side of the bridge, and the rebels are on the other side and negotiating a surrender. But they have no intention of surrendering, and they have fought valiantly, but they are losing, and Titus knows they are. Titus has begged them not to fortify the temple because he doesn't want to destroy it. He works overtime trying to preserve the temple. The Romans accepted all gods, and so this was just another one, and so they accepted the God of the Jews. So he's standing there telling them surrender, but at this point the temple's already burning right behind him. It accidentally caught on fire. Somebody threw a torch up behind, through a window and down with those old panels of cedar wood there, and it just went up in a huge flame. So Titus stands here and he says, please surrender. They do not. So he orders the burning of the city, and what's interesting next, what they do is Beyond these gates, they actually burn, well, let me leave it on here. They burn the archives, which would be about here, and I'll tell you why in a minute. They burn the archives, they burn the Akra, which is right next to that former promontory that used to be there. That was chopped down, but there's still a fort here, so he burns the archives, he burns the fort, and he burns the council house, and he burns the Ophel. So sort of like in a little semicircle behind him, they set fire to all those things. Now, how do we know the archives are here? We already know the Akra is here. Yeah, that is not in question right now. The Israel Antiquities Authority, founded in 2015, they announced the find. They found the Akra, the Greek fort. And everyone's been looking for it, speculating all over the place. Up the hill is this jut of rock that had been turned into a cistern, a big cistern, huge cistern underneath, and I still think they used it as one of the pylons to go across the valley. But on that wall inside the cistern it says Akra. So the water for the fort came funneling down this way. So we know where the Akra is. The council house is pretty much established in this area, and the Ophel is no problem. We know where that is. So why is the archive right here? One archaeologist said that the rebels burned the archives, some of the archives, before the Romans came. They were actually fighting each other in a bitter war between different factions. And the poor people didn't want any records left of what they owed the rich people, so they burned that part of the archive. That's what Josephus says. So they were digging around in this area, and they actually found bullae. Bullae are clay seals, little balls of clay. And you take your document and you wrap it up and you tie string around it and you push right in the center there, your ball of clay, and take your ring with your name on it and push into the clay. So it says your name and your father's name. Now, a lot of people use pictures and things like that, but not the Jews. The Jews use names. Brilliant. It so happens that an archaeologist named Shiloh found an archive of bullae right where I just said. And so he says, we've got names from the Bible, not just names like the Bible, but the actual people from the Bible. Those bullae are right there. So we have our archive. We also have some royal capitals that they found. Elat Mazar, the granddaughter of Benjamin Mazar, found a capital down the hill, down the slope down here, and it's a royal capital. That royal capital is made for a pilaster. A pilaster is a pillar that's up against the wall. It's sort of a squarish shape, and it goes up, and then there's a capital on top, also squarish front and back. They found one of those right down this slope. Automatically I thought, oh, I wonder if that is the capital, the royal capital that went on the top of the pillar right next to the door of the temple where the king used to stand. So royal capital. It's on the top of the pilaster. He stands right there. Later, everything's destroyed, and it falls down in the landslide down below. Elat Mazar finds it and says, look, there's the royal capital. So that's interesting. So we have the royal capital. We have the bullae. Those are interesting archaeological finds. They also found like 220 loom weights on the same slope on the opposite. Titus is here at that Crowfoot Gate, and then up across the plateau and then down behind him, if we can say it that way, they found 220 loom weights. And they said these loom weights are not from a house. They're not from a house making their own linen or anything like that, but rather it had to be some sort of an industry. Well, the Mishnah says there were 82 young women that made 2 veils per year for the temple. Now these veils are huge. They're thick veils. And so they're working day and night making these things. They're too heavy to move very far. So the cottage industry, I'm guessing, it doesn't prove anything, but I'm guessing that's from those young women making the 2 veils for the temple per year. Now along comes Dame Kenyon. Kathleen Kenyon was not knighted, but given the name Dame in the Empire, the British Empire, and she found clay horses down the hill from this same area. And here's a picture of one of those clay horses with a sun on its forehead. Now, right at the doors of the temple, exactly there, the kings of Israel illegitimately, wrongly dedicated horses to the sun. So all these things are right in the same area as where we say the temple is. The archives, the bullae from the archives, the royal capitals, there's actually more than one, loom weights, and these clay horses were found down the slope in a favisa, which is a cave-like place where you put sacred objects that you no longer use. Excuse me. So we find all these things right where we think the temple was. Okay, so we have one more idea for this before we're finished. We have all those things going on down here, none of it going on up here, but we have a testimony of Josephus. Josephus must be standing right about here on the Mount of Olives. Now, the Mount of Olives comes down like this. The highest point is over here, but a lower point is right here. And he describes the walls of Jerusalem for his audience as they're discussing the war between the Romans and the Jews. And he says there's a wall that starts here near the Hippicus Tower. The Hippicus Tower is from Herod. Herod's naming it after his brother, and he built several towers up here. And that wall, he said, comes down from the Hippicus Tower and comes down to the Xystus. Now, Xystus is a Greek word, but he calls it the so-called Xystus because I think the Romans have appropriated the name, but they've turned it into a forum. A Xystus is an open area where the Greeks wrestled. And it actually truly was the form around that square where they could go in rainy days. So they could get under cover in this around here. But the name itself spread to the whole thing, and it became a gymnasium, Xystus. But he calls this the so-called Xystus. So it's not the one that was by the Acra, not down here by the fort, but rather up here. So he says the wall comes down to the Xystus, and then it makes its way over here. And it's either here or over here. There's a council house, and the Jews would meet there. The leaders of the Jews would meet there at the council house. So it's somewhere in this area. And then he stops. He starts again to describe the walls of Jerusalem, and he says, starting from the same place. So everybody goes back to the Hippicus Tower, and he says the wall goes west. Now you'll notice this version of the wall, which is Turkish, doesn't go west. In fact, there's a very steep valley here. The wall doesn't go west here. But people talk about it, and they say, well, Josephus really meant to go south, not west. That's what he meant. He must have been wrong. And then he says the wall turns south over the Gihon. The Gihon Spring is down here. And so straight up the hill, he said turn south. Instead, they say, well, he meant east. One day went as far as to say, strangely, that you stand looking west and go south, you stand looking south and go east, trying to figure out what Josephus said. Now here's my theory, and I think it fits, and I'll show you why it's important in a minute. He comes down here with his first wall and ambles down to here to the council house. And then he says you go west from the same place, meaning the council house, not up here where everybody else goes. That's too Western. That's too rational. Let's do something. But down here is where he meant to go west. And you see the Turkish wall does go west. Now the Turkish wall came a lot later. But many times walls were built over the remains of the original foundations of the original walls. So it makes sense. So Josephus is standing here. The wall comes down like this. And then it goes west, and then he says it turns south over the Gihon. Now the Gihon's here, and straight across here would be where the wall turns south. Bliss and Dickey speculated from an old map, 13th, 14th century map. There was a tower here, and they brought their walls up this far, so they speculated the wall came like that. And that seems to be what he's talking about. Not all this over here where we have to make up explanations, but rather that he says start over here, start again right here at the same place, and go up here. And then the question is, why didn't he mention all this turns in the walls right here? Again, I think the temple is in the way. He can't see it because the temple is sitting right here. So he's looking across, he can see this wall, he can see the Gihon Spring, and he can see this wall turn south right here. So all of this is away from his view. He can't see it. So I believe this is what is happening with Josephus and his explanations of the wall. What that does is it helps us see something is probably in the way. We know that there were bullae found down here. We know the horse with the sun on the foreheads found here. Right down here is found the capital that I think used to be right next to the temple. And so we have all these things fitting, archaeologically fitting, where we say the temple was, and we've established the wall here based on Josephus. Now that needs to be done because a lot of people even ignored what Bliss and Dickey did. What Bliss and Dickey did was phenomenal. I shudder to think anybody would go to all the trouble they went to in present day times. But this shows that there was a wall here, according to Josephus, and Bliss and Dickey's wall did come up like this. And that really shouldn't be a question in anyone's mind whatsoever. So what we'd like you to do is to think about the first video. If this made any sense, or not at all, go back and watch the first video, and then come and see the extra explanations that we have for what's going on in Jerusalem, and see why we say the temple had to be down here. There's a lot more information. We could talk about the gate that has to be on this side for the sacrifice of the red heifer. There's no gate here. There's one up here, but none across from the Dome of the Rock, none across from where some people say the temple was. And if you put the gate up here across from the Golden Gate and the temple back over here, you have no room for a massive Roman fort. We could go into a lot more detail, but we're not going to. We're just trying to encourage you, if you get to Jerusalem, go down to this point here, find Oskar Schindler's grave site, and go up the hill and find the rabbi and encourage him and stop by and see him. He's friendly. I wanted him to build a platform so you could look down where the dig is going to happen. I don't know if they've had any funds to do that, but I think you would be encouraged if you went to see him. We can also try in the future to test our theory. And one of the tests is this. We would dig in this valley down here looking for those 60-foot stones that Josephus talks about that surrounded the temple. They should be still down here. I don't think the Romans would have gone underground very far trying to destroy everything. So there should be some of those 60-foot stones down here. Also, across the valley from this place should be a mikveh. A mikveh is a ritual bath that the high priest took before he did the ritual of the red heifer. So we think we know where that is up here, but it's in a graveyard, so it might be hard to get permission to look at it. We want to go under the Temple Mount and look for iron clamps. Josephus said when Solomon built the walls, he put them together with huge iron clamps so that they would never move. Now, they might have rusted away, but rust leaves a stain. And so getting under there to look for that might be one way to prove it. Certainly digging down here would set us on the right path. So we want to test our theory, and these are some of the ways that we can do it. But for now, that's our second video. There's a third coming. We're going to talk about why a Christian should be interested in building the temple. This has come under some dispute in recent days, some animosity, some name calling, but I'd like to set this record straight and calm everybody down and show you from the Bible why we should help build the temple. But thank you for your attention. God bless.